Now, Bernie Sanders is facing a good amount of backlash for praising Fidel Castro's communist reign over Cuba, which frankly is awfully unfair if you ask me. After all, it seemed to work out for everybody. You know, if you ignore the poverty, starvation, economic despair, and oppression. Because what's a little malnutrition when you've got the government cheese, right? Just not actual cheese, because nobody could afford that. Now, this is not a big secret. In fact, it's pretty much available to anyone with access to a keyboard and Wi-Fi, so not Cubans. Castro's 5-decade reign in Cuba left the country in shambles. What started out as a revolution that promised to lift Cubans out of poverty at the expense of the ultra-wealthy, sounded all familiar? It ended up wrecking a nation for generations. Castro seized land for redistribution and limited how much you could own. His socialist policies like free education, wage limits, rent control, and health care for all bankrupted the entire country. When the Soviet Union collapsed because its own socialist model went belly up and Cuba lost those subsidies and trade agreements, malnutrition triggered an outbreak of disease so bad that the state's free healthcare system could not keep up. Cubans were forced to buy rationed food with government food cards. Things like dairy products and meat were too expensive for most people to buy on the regular. The state did provide free education, of course, but a great pile of help that is when you graduate and you can't find a job because your country's entire economy is in the toilet. In the 1990s, the housing deficit in Havana grew by 20% a year. Nearly half of all the houses would be considered structurally uninhabitable. Most haven't seen any considerable amount of upkeep since the 1950s. Didn't like it? Couldn't say so. Anybody who spoke out against the government were thrown into horrific prisons that most people wouldn't let their dogs walk through. Thousands of political dissidents were harassed and tortured. Basic human rights and political freedoms were outright denied. Things were so bad under Castro that people were loading their kids, babies, and all of their handful of earthly possessions onto pool noodles and garbage can lids, trying to float to Florida to get away from it. You know, you don't do that if your country's utopian dream is working out so well. Now, Sanders says this.
We're very opposed to the authoritarian nature of Cuba. But, it's unfair to simply say everything is bad. When Fidel Castro came into office, you know what he did? He had a massive literacy program. Is that a bad thing? Even though Fidel Castro did it?
There's a lot of dissidents imprisoned in Cuba.
That's right, and we condemn that.
He likes to point to the country's literacy program as some kind of bright spot in the midst of an otherwise steaming pile of dog crap, because apparently if you throw enough glitter on a turd, it magically turns into a cupcake. You know what their literacy program was? It was force-feeding people communist propaganda at the point of a government gun. So hey, sorry about your lack of basic freedom and, food, but at least you can read about your own oppression in a book, right? Great. See, this is socialism. This is communism. It's one and the same. Guess how we know? Because Karl Marx said so. There is no utopia. There's no final destination where everyone is free and healthy and happy and dancing through the fields chasing butterflies. There is no socialist paradise that we just haven't discovered because no one's done it right yet. Castro was not a bad example of far-left policies. He was a perfect example of them. They worked exactly as they were designed to. Everyone was made equal, equally poor, while the state enjoyed all the amenities of a government that didn't have to worry about ever being challenged by the unarmed, starving peasants. And that is exactly what the left will do here. We're not immune to this just because we're America. We can go down with the ship just as easily as any other nation that has ever ushered in these terrible, awful, no good, very bad policies that have never worked in the history of mankind. All of the medical innovations made possible by a free market, all that technology, all the means of production, all gone. The agricultural advancements that have fed billions, the biomedical engineering that has cured diseases and given us vaccines and prosthetics, gone. All gone. You will own nothing, not even yourself. This is not a secret. It's right there in the history books over and over and over again. Cuba, Venezuela, the USSR, all lying in ruin, thanks to revolutions that promise to solve everyone's problems if you will just surrender your freedom and any sense of personal responsibility to the state. And I don't know about you, but I would rather sweat every single day for the little that I do have than wind up face first in the dirt licking the boots of a government that promised to save me and trampled on me instead. And that's your Reality Check, America. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube page, that you like us on Facebook and Twitter, and stay sane out there.